Hello, friends. This is an interesting case study on how the carbon taxation impacts the trade. And this is a case study involving two groups. One is European Union, EU, and other is India. Uh, as per the reports, from January 1, 2026, the Indian steel and aluminium exports to Europe would be facing a new tax, a new carbon tax. That carbon tax would be because of what is known as the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. This CBAM is a carbon tax levied at the border of European Union to account for the emissions, carbon emissions of the products which are manufactured outside Europe. For example, in this case, we would be discussing the trade impacts because of this CBAM or the carbon tax levied on the steel and aluminium exports to Europe. India is a major exporter to European Union and it has a market share of about 22%. It is exporting goods worth $5.8 billion, and by goods I mean only steel and aluminium. And this value has reduced 24% in the last year. And the reason is this CBAM. Now, what is this CBAM that, and how do we calculate that CBAM that we are going to discuss in this short lecture? We need to understand that CBAM mechanism would ultimately lead to carbon tax. It has not yet levied the carbon tax, but what it has started is the process. Now, what is this process? The process is of calculation, the process is of carbon accounting. What we do is, in this case, the exporters are required to account for the carbon emissions during steel manufacture and aluminium manufacture. They will have to report these numbers to the European Union authority. Then the European Union authority would calculate the CBAM. Now this requires a lot of compliance things. Compliance cost, data gaps, verification hurdles, all this has now started impacting the Indian exporters of steel and aluminium, and that has resulted 24% decline in the exports even before the carbon tax has been levied. Now this is very interesting. That is why I named this slide as the strain is already visible. Now what is this CBAM? As we were discussing earlier, it is about the European Union's carbon pricing system to the imports, wherein the companies, they will have to pay for the emissions under the EU emission trading system. So CBAM imposes a cost on the foreign producers, in this case Indian steel and aluminium manufacturers, to prevent companies from shifting their production to countries with weaker climate rules. So for example, EU would levy the tax on the importers, and that tax would be passed on to the Indian exporters. So the current coverage is steel, aluminium, cement, fertilizers, electricity, hydrogen. All these are very energy intensive sectors, mind well. So that is why they have levied the tax on this CBAM. How do you calculate CBAM? How is the CBAM liability computed? For that, do a carbon accounting, calculate what are the carbon emissions per ton, then what is the total production, and then what is the current EU carbon price. So for example, the current EU carbon price was 80 euros per ton of CO2. If there are some X amount of CO2 emitted during production, then we multiply the emissions with the price, that gives us the CBAM price or CBAM cost, which is nothing but the carbon tax. So let us now in the next video understand how this carbon tax is going to impact the trade.